Hey guys, Ben here and welcome back to another video on The Flash Season 9. Today we're going to be talking about Barry becoming original timeline Flash, or taking the place of that original Flash that we saw way back in Season 1. So I'm very excited to cover this because it's been a long time coming and this was a major moment in the last episode. So we're going to be breaking it down, theorizing about what's going on, but most importantly telling you what's changed and why things are the way that they are. So if you do go on to enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like and a comment and subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future DCTV videos later this year. Okay guys, so in the last few days I've posted 2 or 3 videos about the episode. So if you've missed any of those videos, I did a trailer breakdown, I did a review, and I did a video on specifically the ending of the episode to do with Eddie Thawne / Malcolm Gilmore. So go check out those videos. You can click on the top right corner of the screen to watch one of them, but the rest are on the channel as well. So obviously The Flash Season 9 episode 10 was massive, and I think we all knew that going into this episode when they released that trailer, which showed us Barry and Thawne going back to the year 2000, to the night that Nora is supposed to die. And it finally happened. It really blew me away when it actually happened on screen. I literally had my hands on my head and I was almost like screaming to myself because it's such a big moment for fans of the show, and it's been around since season 1. We knew we would get there at some point, but it's finally happened, and so I think that's why everyone's been just going nuts about it. So let's talk about this, let's break it down, and let's talk about some theories. So it all begins with the voices of Henry Allen and Thawne, played by Tom Cavanagh, saying, "Run Barry, run," as Barry runs and stops Thawne as he is about to approach Barry's parents' house. So he stops him on his way, and obviously Thawne isn't happy about this, and also he's basically teasing Barry that is he that desperate that he is willing to change the timeline. But Barry is actually there to try and convince Thawne to not go through with killing his younger self or even attacking anyone. But obviously our Barry knows that the fixed point in time is that his mum is supposed to die and Barry is supposed to save his younger self. But Thawne doesn't know anything about this because this version of Thawne is not as advanced and he's not been through all of the things that we've seen on the show so far. And if actually Barry was able to convince him to not go ahead with anything, we would probably have another flashpoint on our hands, because as Barry knows and as I just said, Barry's mum has to die on this night, otherwise things are just going to go way out of line, just like we saw at the start of season 3 when we had the Flashpoint storyline. So I guess the question is that I was asking myself, is there really much point of this talk apart from setting up the conversation that they have after Thawne goes through with his plan and doesn't listen to Barry? So I'm pretty sure that was the whole point of this, and I don't think Barry was actually trying to convince him to stop the attack. I think he was more just stalling him and actually giving him a warning about the consequences that will ensue if he goes ahead and tries to do this. And so Barry warns him that he will lose everything, but Thawne just doesn't listen. He is completely in his head. He thinks he's going to win. This is going to be the worst night of Barry's entire life, and so that's what he's living for. Also, I don't think this version of Thawne knows what version of Barry that he is meeting. He doesn't even know that Barry's gone through this many times before, because Barry doesn't actually tell him until after he's done the deed. And so I think this Thawne is thinking if he kills this young Barry, he's going to erase this version of Barry. But our Barry knows all too well what is supposed to go down on this night, and it actually goes down like that. So we go over to the Allen household as Reverse Flash sets off, and it begins as usual. Nora is holding the glass of wine, gravity shifts as the speedsters break into the house. And so at this point, you know, it's all going to happen. You're going to see our Barry becoming that original Flash. So Barry fights Thawne through the window. He is that Flash that young Barry saw that night, and the past versions of Barry who were present in the house also saw him. We also see young Barry played by Logan. Obviously this was a nice moment for us because we lost him a couple of years ago, and you know, it's very sad. So it was very nice to see him back on screen. obviously it's old and new footage, so they've just mixed it all up. That's what they've done in the past few seasons, or whenever we've gone back to it. Obviously the first time we went properly back to it was the season 1 finale. And so as Barry and Reverse Flash fight around the living room, you see season 1 Flash from that season 1 finale show up and watch from the room, and they reuse that same footage of him arriving after traveling through the Speed Force and literally popping up in his old bedroom. But as that Barry opens the door, he sees his mum being surrounded by both speedsters and their lightning. And so originally what would happen was that original timeline Flash was phasing, and he would put his hand out to tell that season 1 Barry to stop. And so obviously that Barry knew that he would be there, so obviously this original timeline Flash, as we call him, was definitely from the future at some point, because he knows what's going to happen and he knows exactly where that past Barry is going to be. And the fact that it's really important, he puts his hand out and stops him from interfering because of his mistakes with creating Flashpoint in the past. So it's very important, and this time it's actually our Barry that takes that place of that original Flash. And so it's here that they make some changes, because our Barry isn't phasing, it's just himself. And so he holds his hand out to season 1 Barry to not interfere. The shots that they do have been recreated really well, but they've decided to not go with the phasing Barry. That's an interesting choice. I would like to hear what Eric Wallace has to say about that change, but clearly that's a change in the timeline. That is something different. We've never seen this before. He's always phasing in the past every time we've been back to this point. And obviously the suit has changed. It's different from that original Flash suit that we saw. It's our current day Barry suit, but most of the stuff apart from that remains the same, with Barry running young Barry out of the house. That was his main mission, because, you know, Reverse Flash was actually targeting young Barry, and if he killed him, then yes, it would erase him from the timeline. And instead Reverse Flash kills Nora, which was always meant to happen, but obviously Reverse Flash doesn't know that until he's actually killed her. And so it's a fixed moment in time. That's what Barry reveals to Thawne. And so I'm going to rattle through a few more changes. First up, a big change is the fact that Barry interferes with Reverse Flash when he is running towards the Allen household. And originally there was a portal that would open from the Speed Force, and the two speedsters would come out chasing each other. First Reverse Flash and then Barry, and so that was replaced with them actually already meeting up in the day. That's a timeline change. And then also them meeting up in the street just before this and having that conversation, because that conversation wasn't had. Originally that would be a Speed Force portal, the two would be chasing each other after fighting in 2024 in the original timeline where that crisis was supposed to happen. We had the newspaper that I'm sure all of you guys remember, but that was retconned after Crisis, because that crisis came at a different year, and that was Crisis on Infinite Earths. So basically everything shifted after Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that's why you're not seeing the portal opening up with Barry and Eobard running from the future back to the past together. So that's one big change. The other change that I mentioned before is that Barry's suit's different. It's our current day Barry suit, and so the suit that you would have seen on that 2024 Barry doesn't exist because that timeline's not the same. I think that's pretty easy to understand. And then Barry also is no longer phasing, as I said before. I don't think that's much of a big deal, apart from the fact that it's just a different appearance and they can actually see this version of the Flash much more clearly. And obviously we didn't continue to this point because that original Flash is supposed to run out of the house before season 1 Barry goes up and actually talks to Nora. So it still makes sense if that Barry, because he's actually still there, would go out after everything's happened and Nora is dying on the ground. And normally, if you remember back to season 1 and the finale and the conversation they had, that should also be altered, because this version of Barry's mum earlier in the day did meet a future version of Barry, and so she wouldn't say you just look like my father, because she did that earlier in the day and would recognize Barry when he takes his mask off. So instead, remember earlier in the episode, Barry introduced himself as Bart. So that would be her response to him taking the mask off. And then obviously he would go on to say, yeah, I am your son, just like he did in season 1. So that is a change in terms of what we would have seen. We didn't see that in the episode because we are following our version of Barry and not the past versions of Barry. And so I think there is no real problems here in terms of continuity. Yes, the continuity doesn't exactly line up, but this is post-crisis we're talking about. I think it makes sense to no longer have that portal. It doesn't make sense that they would be chasing each other. It makes sense that they've gone around it from a different angle like we saw in this episode. So I think they did a really good job reusing footage and introducing new footage. Yes, it would have been cool to see Barry phasing just like that original Flash, but it's really not a big deal, I don't think. But let's go on to talk about what happens after this recreation of the iconic moment from the Flash season 1 finale. And that is that Barry and Thawne talk to each other after the murder. So originally how it would end, you see Reverse Flash running down the street, he loses his speed, he screams, and then he takes his mask off. That's how we originally saw it. But in this version, post-crisis, you have Barry coming up behind Thawne after all of this, and after Thawne has talked to Gideon and her saying you're stuck here in this time period, Barry talks to Thawne, which was one of the best moments of the episode and I think nearly of the entire show, because he's basically like, I've beaten you, Thawne. This moment has impacted me for such a long time in my life, and now that I'm actually here, and basically he is that version of himself that he saw many times in the past. Every time he would come back to this night, he's now finally come to peace with it, and obviously this is terrible news for Thawne. And it's interesting if there will be any timeline changes after this, because now that Thawne has gone through all of this and he knows that, you know, ultimately I don't think he can beat Barry, because Barry in this moment has accepted that while this is the worst night of his life, he's kind of learnt to live with it, and it's a fixed point in time. He knows he can't do anything about it. So maybe if we were to ever go back to season 1 at this point and time travel, you would see a difference in the Harrison Wells Thawne that we saw throughout season 1. It's just an interesting thing to talk about. But just finally, in regards to that original Flash, that Flash doesn't exist anymore. He was from a previous timeline, and especially after post-crisis, that Flash doesn't exist, and that's why you're not seeing that OG Barry, because that Barry has been completely erased as far as we know, and I don't think we were ever going to see him, and I think he was always going to be replaced. These newer timeline versions of characters always pretty much replace the previous versions of the characters. Obviously there are some anomalies like Savitar who managed to still exist and survive, and all they've done with this episode is just make our Barry become the one who fought Thawne, and they've just been fighting in a different way than we originally saw. So I think it makes sense. Let me know, what do you think about all of this down in the comments below. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to leave a like and a comment. Also subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future videos. As I said at the start of this video, go check out my latest videos on this episode because it was a crazy episode. I've got 3 videos up on the channel, but for now you can click on the top right corner of the screen to watch my latest video, and I will catch you guys later. Goodbye.
I see red.